We often come across statements such as a particular galaxy is 30 million light years away or 5 million light years away and so on. Such distances are inconceivable when you compare with any length that we ever measure on the Earth. So how are such distance estimates made in the first place and to such a certain acceptable degree of accuracy? It turns out that there is no single method which can be used to measure all the different scales of distances. Instead, there is a succession of different techniques that are used to measure larger and larger distances. Every time we measure a distance to some set of objects, like say nearby stars, we can learn something about them that lets us measure out to even more distant stars. This scheme of successive distance measurement and calibration is known as the cosmic distance ladder, because every measurement is like a rung on a ladder which takes us to the next measurement on the next rung. So at the lowest rung we have the measurement for nearest distances, such as those within the solar system, and this is hence valid for celestial mechanics. The most accurate technique is imaging using lasers and radar, wherein we shine a beam of light on some object of interest and subsequently we receive the reflected light. This time difference between the transmission and reception of these two signals, it gives us a round trip time, let's call it as t, and assuming that the speed of light is the same in both directions, we can then estimate the distance to the object as d, where d is the distance to that object between us and that object, and that can be obtained as c t by 2. The next rung on this ladder is the measurement of distances to stars and moving clusters. The technique used here is that of trigonometric parallax, which is the apparent shift in the position of a star with respect to the background stars due to a change in the position of the observer. So if I am observing a star from the Earth, then with respect to the background of stars on the celestial sphere, as the Earth goes around the Sun, so the position of the star is also will also apparently shift. So this method is called as trigonometric parallax, and the baseline for such making such measurements is the average Earth-Sun distance, which is one astronomical unit, which is around 1.5 times 10 to the power 11 meters. And so by knowing this angular distance theta, we can find out the distance, which is 1 AU by the tan of this. The parallax method, it gives us measurements of up to 500 parsec away. Compared to the Milky Way, this is approximately the Sun's local neighborhood. But if you want to measure further out, we go to the next rung of the cosmic distance ladder, which is spectroscopic parallax. We can measure the flux from a star as well as its distance, and from this we can estimate its luminosity. That using the flux luminosity relation, we can estimate its luminosity. Then also by using certain filters, various different filters, we can measure the color of the star. Then plotting the luminosity versus color, it gives us a diagram which is known, it gives us this particular scatter plot, which we call as the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. Now let's say I want to measure the distance to a star whose parallax is too small. Instead, we measure its color. By measuring its color and using the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, we can get a good estimate of the range of its luminosity. So let's say I get a star whose color is this value. So I can get a range of luminosity for this particular star. Then by measuring the flux and then using this relation, because we have measured the flux and using the luminosity range, we can find a range of distances to that particular star. But then there could be problems with this method. So for example, let's say I observe a reddened star, so I'm really not sure whether the color is red, but I'm not really sure what will be the range of luminosities. So in that case, what we do is we look at that particular star and we look for a cluster of stars to which that particular star belongs. And then by measuring the flux and color to this local cluster to which the star belongs, and with various guesses to their distance, we can further constrain their cluster. So we take guesses for this distance and say we obtain this stars in this cluster over here. That means we have underestimated distance, so we take another estimate of the distance until we reach a range which is closer to the main sequence. So this enables us to obtain a good estimate of the distance to the star. This method works for distances up to about 10 kiloparsec, which is most of the galaxies within the Milky Way. Now this spectroscopic parallax method, this can be generalized to a technique of using what are called as standard candles as a measure of luminosity, measure of cosmic distances. A standard candle is defined as any object whose luminosity is known. In general, this is the definition of a standard candle. Any object whose luminosity is well defined or whose luminosity is well known. Then using the flux luminosity relation, if by measuring the flux we can estimate the distance. But to do so, we need some kind of an observable property which is related to its luminosity. Now this observable property could be color, like as given over here, or it could be the variability. So first we need to calibrate how bright these such objects are by using objects which are already close to us and whose distances have been already accurately measured. So in other words, by using known nearby examples. And then we find the relationship between the particular observable and the luminosity, and then we identify a correct candle with which we can obtain accurately measure its luminosity, and that is going to help us constrain its length, its distance. Now some of these standard candles, the two of these specific standard candles, they are used to take us to the next rung of the cosmic distance ladder. In spite of their appearance, stars are not unchanging. Since the late 18th century, a new class of stars called variable stars have been discovered. The brightness of these variable stars change over the course of months to hours. A subclass of such variables which are useful for distant measurements are the Cepheid variables. These variables were discovered by Henrietta Leavitt. She noticed that in such variables, the brighter the star is, the longer its variability period. So in other words, the period of variability is related to its luminosity, because luminosity is a measure of its brightness. So by measuring the period of a Cepheid variable, we can have a good estimate of its luminosity, which enables us to use them as standard candles. So this is the relation that was obtained by Henrietta Leavitt. So for a star whose luminosity is less, the variation is faster. Its variability, it flickers much faster. But as its luminosity increases, then it varies much more slowly. Or in other words, its period, the luminosity period is also much larger. So we have a well-defined relation between the period and the luminosity. So this enables us to use these objects as standard candles. Now the greater the brightness of a standard candle, the larger would be the cosmic distances that can be measured. So one such set of extremely bright objects are supernovae, which are powerful and luminous stellar explosions. It is a transient astronomical event which occurs during the last evolutionary stages of a massive star, or when a white dwarf is triggered into a runaway nuclear fusion, which results in luminosity of the order of millions and billions of solar luminosities. Now looking at known supernovae in nearby galaxies, we can classify supernovae into different types. These are some of the light curves of some of these different types of supernovae that are known. And out of these different kind of supernovae, one particular type, that is type 1a, they have the most consistent light curve. As you can see, the different kind of types, there is a large inconsistency in the light curve, in the way the light curve changes with time. But this type 1a supernovae, they are very, very consistent, and the reason why they are so consistent is because their mechanism is very much different from a core collapse supernova. Type 1a supernovae, it involves a runaway nuclear reaction which takes place due to the accretion of matter from a companion star to a white dwarf. Now, because the white dwarf has got a specific mass limit, it would have a very specific composition before the explosion. So, nearly all type 1a supernovae, they occur pretty much the same way, and which results in nearly identical light curves, and hence the luminosity is the same almost every time. As a result, type 1a supernovae, they are standard candles which immense brightness, and they enable us to measure distances of up to hundreds of millions of light years away. Next, this is an image of the Hubble ultra deep field, which shows around 10,000 galaxies within an angular size of 11.5 square arc minutes. Now, each point over here is not a star, is actually a galaxy. Now, measuring accurate distances to such objects using standard candles is not possible. So, because even if there were a supernova explosion, but then we will not be able to resolve it from the galaxy itself. So, we cannot really use standard candles to measure out to such distances. So, instead, what we use is we use cosmological redshift. So, it's basically as the universe expands, and suppose I have a distant source which is emitting light, and which we are going to receive on Earth. Because of the expansion of the universe, by the time we receive the light, the light would have got considerably, it would have got redshift in. So this sources which are far away, the much further away, the larger will be the redshift. So measuring the redshift to a distant galaxy and knowing the what is called as the Hubble's constant, because the redshift is related to the distance in this way. The redshift is defined as the difference in the wavelength divided by the expected wavelength, and this is related to the distance times the Hubble's constant divided by c. So if we can measure the redshift, and if we have an estimate of the Hubble's constant, then we can find out what is the distance to the galaxy, because c is ultimately a constant. But then how do we find out the redshift, because we really don't know what is the expected wavelength to do, what is the wavelength that we are expecting. So for that we look for signatures in the spectrum of the light that we are receiving, and this signature is basically the pattern of lines which we expect. And elements have different elements and compounds, they have specific known such pattern of such lines, and by just comparing them to such a known pattern, we can find out how much of redshift has occurred. And we can also we can estimate the Hubble's constant by looking at nearby galaxies whose distance have been already measured using standard candles. So like for instance, over here we have a plot of redshift versus luminosity distance, and we can see that this more or less it almost falls in a straight line. So then it's just a matter of putting this over here, is just a matter of extrapolating this particular curve to larger redshifts. So with this we can measure distances up to hundreds of millions of light years away. Then there could also be correction terms which could occur due to the fact that the rate of expansion of the universe has been changing. So this summarizes what I would like to refer to as a bootstrapping scheme for measuring the cosmic distances, which seemingly looks like a pyramid, and it also provides us with a solid foundation for looking out further into our cosmos.
Good afternoon, everyone. The next topic is gravitational lensing. So Einstein's equivalence principle states that an observer in the gravitational field, it experiences a certain gravitational force downwards. It is same as an observer in an accelerating frame of reference where the acceleration is upwards. In essence, Einstein's equivalence principle states that gravity is equivalent to an accelerated reference frame. This immediately leads us to the result of bending of light in the gravitational field. How does it happen? In an inertial frame of reference, which is devoid of any gravitational field, the light travels in straight line. Now imagine that this reference frame, let us say a lift, is getting accelerated in the upward direction. Now the light is still traveling in the straight line which is here, but the reference frame has moved up, and that causes the person who is in the accelerated frame to see the light bending, and hence he will say that the light is curved, following a curved trajectory. Now this accelerated reference frame is same as the one with gravity, and hence we can say that the light is bent in the gravitational field. Now this was first observed around the sun by Eddington during a solar eclipse, when he noticed that the observed locations of stars was different than when the sun was not there. And using exact calculations and lot of error analysis, Eddington was able to verify the bending of light as per Einstein's principle of equivalence. It was Zwicky who later proposed that not only sun, we can have bigger masses like the entire galaxies bending the light of the objects which are beyond them, that is the farther galaxies, and that is what gave rise to the entire gravitational lensing field. Here in this image we have a schematic diagram of lensing, where this is the object which is causing the lensing, this is the source, and here we are in the observer plane. Now if all these 3 points are equally aligned, that is they are in the same line, then what happens is the rays of light coming from the source are equally bent and seen on the earth in all directions. And in such a case, when we have the lensing object and the lens object in the same line of sight from earth, then we see what is called as Einstein ring. So here the background galaxy is completely smeared out in the form of a ring, and using the gravitational calculations of general relativity, we can get this angle of Einstein ring as given in this equation. Based on the geometry of the lens object and the source object, we sometimes see 4 images, sometimes see an arc, and as shown in this image, and so on. Here is an image that was observed by Chandra telescope, wherein several images of the background quasar are seen in the field of view. So this is another schematic of the gravitational lensing. Here in the lensing plane we have mass distribution perpendicular to the line of sight, and in the source plane we have the distribution of stars and the background galaxy, again considered here perpendicular to the line of sight. So the method of getting the actual position of the star or the galaxy that is getting lensed is as follows. First we use the general relativistic metric, that is space-time metric. Then to calculate the path of light, we first find out what is the gravitational potential based on the density of the lens object. Then we do the calculations of geodesics, that is the shortest distances in the curved spacetime from the source to observer, and we put an additional condition of null path because this is the light trajectory that we are talking about. So we solve for photon path assuming that deflection is small, so we can treat a small perturbation and integrate along the undeflected path to obtain the deflection angle. So in the observed astronomical data, we can know the distribution of the lensing object, and hence we can know the distance to this lensing object, that is BD, and we can know this observed angle theta of the image that is seen, and the whole reverse calculation will be used to find out what is alpha and what is beta to locate the actual position of the source. There are many varieties of effects happening in the field of gravitational lensing. So in the strong lensing effect, what you have here in this picture is a group of galaxies which are in the yellow color, and this galaxy cluster is lensing an object far behind it, that is another galaxy, and in these oval shapes you can see the smeared out light from the distant galaxy. So one distant galaxy has been scattered or lensed in these four different parts. When we reconstruct the light of that original source, we get an image which is like this in the square box, and its original position is corresponding to this tilted rectangle behind the galaxy cluster. So where we see the bright spots here, they are possible star forming regions, and this whole structure could be two galaxies which are merging. So that is an effect called strong lensing, and we can infer a lot about the mass of this whole galaxy cluster also from this lensing effect. And although that is more prominent at the edges where the tangential shear effect is happening, a broad idea about the whole galaxy cluster can also be inferred. How do we know that these four images belong to the same galaxy? It is from the spectral analysis. Another effect that happens in gravitational lensing is called microlensing. It is shown in this animation over here, where there is a smaller object coming exactly in the path of light from a distant star. What happens in such a case is, let's say, a 10 times Jupiter mass, is that it causes the ray of light which was going away from the detector in the absence of the mass also to come towards the detector. As a result, we have already the light which was directly coming to the detector plus the additional light which was going away from the detector also getting scattered towards the detector. As a result, we see the peak of intensity in the starlight. So using microlensing, we can study exoplanets and related phenomena. There is also an effect called weak lensing. Here, the lens that is formed is due to a dark matter web, which is shown here in the gray scale, and it allows us to probe distant parts of the universe. And here, the path of the distant galaxies is scattered and sheared along the web through this dark matter. Using weak lensing, we can probe Hubble's constant and many such properties, such as the dark matter distribution in the universe. Another important effect that occurs in the studies of gravitational lensing is because there are such different images formed even for a single object like a quasar. There are different paths from the original object to the observed position, and from there to the earth, detectors on the earth. So these paths require different times for the light to reach to us. Such path differences have been studied over the years. So this is a data from 2004 to 2012, and we see that they are having a similar variation in the light curves. So the theoretical understanding of the changes in the shape of the lensed object is shown here. So here is the source plane, that is the object which is far behind. If the object is at this red spot, then the circular elliptically shaped symmetric mass will scatter the light in these four different red spots. If the object is at this green location, then it will produce these three green images. If it is in this blue region, then it will produce these two images. If it is this in this cyan region, it will produce this and this image. And if it is in this particular region, purple colored region, then it will produce this image, as well as one small spot you can see at the center. So these are called caustic curves in the source plane and critical curves in the lens plane. Caustics are of two types: tangential and radial. Radial caustic causes radial magnification. For example, this faint blue is stretched in the radial direction, whereas this green spot, which is near to the tangential caustic, is smeared out in the tangential region. Using such critical curves, scientists were able to find out the farthest isolated resolved star, and they have named it Icarus. This is at the redshift of Z is equal to 1.49, and it is 100 times farther than the stars resolved so far. They were start observing this supernova SN Refsedal 211, and in this field of image they found that a certain star has got magnified in intensity. This magnification is due to microlensing of a distant star as shown in this figure. You can see that the point object over here in 2014 has much more intensity in 2016. Thank you, and for more references you can visit these free sources on the internet. Thank you.